Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning to you. Good morning to all of you out there. Well, I think it's fun because you and I, Molly and I, always like to start the show off with a little chat. Gives us time to talk about what's going on in town, read your Facebook responses, and just have a little bit of fun.
Yeah, but today's no exception to that. But you listen to us every day, so we figured, let's go ahead and expand the circle a little bit and welcome some new faces to our chat.
Absolutely. So first today we have a life coach and founder of BX Life Coaching, Berni. Did I say your last name right?
Sean.
All right. Close.
Now we got it.
Close. Got it. Dasha Kelly, she's a poet and founder of Stillwater's Collective, and Esther Crawford is a mom, blogger, and social media enthusiast. Welcome all of you to the Morning Blend Roundtable.
Thank you for having
Nice
me.
to have you. Who was the one with the who blogged about Weight Watchers?
You did.
Yeah.
And you ended up with how many people checking in on your blog on a daily basis?
Well, overall, I have over 8 million views.
Amazing.
Wow. Yeah.
That's unbelievable. Why do you think that is?
I think it's because weight loss really resonates with people. It's such a personal story, and I was willing to share, the good, bad, and ugly about it, and people really connected with that.
What's the hardest part? Is it losing weight or maintaining the weight loss? Because we've had this discussion on our show.
I think for me, it was actually losing it. I really needed help figuring out what exactly I needed to do on a daily basis. And once I got that, once it became a habit, I was able to kind of continue forward.
What's your one tip for everybody, your best tip for either losing weight or maintaining it?
Write everything you're eating down.
You gotta have a food log.
journal.
Everything.
Yeah, we've talked about that before too. A lot of people talk about that just because
Keep
it makes
yourself
them
accountable.
aware of what they're eating on a daily basis.
Because you don't realize sometimes just the little snacks you take in, how quickly they add up, or condiments or things like that. And
Yeah.
so, being accountable really makes a
Definitely.
difference. That's a good tip.
That's interesting.
I like
Man, that's a lot of people checking
Yeah.
out her blog.
I
That's
know.
fascinating. Okay,
Huge.
so what do we want to talk about first? Are women too nice to land a job?
Yeah, I think this was a really interesting one. Okay, so we sent all of you an article. We actually posted the article out on Facebook too, so people could read it as well. The article, in essence, basically says that they did a study. And what it was is they wrote letters of recommendation for jobs between men and women. And they found that the words that were used to describe women were kind of communal. So they said words like caring, sensitive, compassionate, supportive colleague. Those are the words that they used to describe women versus things like aggressive and go-getter and things like that. So they said in end, those set of words are positive, but they kept them from being hired.
So the highest level of jobs, right?
For the highest level. So it begged the question, are women too nice to land a job? What do you ladies think?
Well, I did have a chance to read the article, and it talked about specifically in the higher education sector. And my whole take on that, well, there are a few different things. Obviously, number one, I don't think it's so much the question of are women too nice. I think are just certain types of people too nice, if you will, if that's how you want to define it. And so if the applicant, whether or not they're female or male, if they have the tendency to be a too nice person, a pushover, then obviously the recommendations, being given for them will have the tendency to sound very communal, like it said in that article. So my take on it isn't so much are women too nice and are women at a disadvantage, because the descriptions about, the characters, what their qualities, are communal. I think it's just the type of personality and behavior a person exudes.
Why do you think it is, though, that we tend to describe women in words that are communal? Like, she's sensitive, she gets along well with others, or we think of them in relation to community or how she gets along with other people. Whereas with men, we use agentive words like how they get things done, accomplishments, things that are very action and results oriented.
I think across the board, that's a lot of how we come through the world. Even if you're a woman who is assertive and aggressive and a go-getter, and you're very clear about what you want, we've been conditioned and cultured to maintain a balance, to be a go-getter and still be nice, and we have to be
Right.
Exactly.
I read another article, really interesting, that more than just the nurturing and that we're nice and too soft, that we don't, there's an office that we're not constructed to be aggressive or be arrogant.
And if we
That's a
are,
good word,
then we
right.
get the B word.
Yes.
That's another thing that was in this
Exactly.
article. That women who are
People don't
assertive,
wanna work with you.
then people don't want to work with you, because instead of being aggressive or independent like men are, or assertive, then we get the B word.
Right.
I think there's a way to do it and not be ruthless. You can still be really clear about what you want, and I think you can still be very definite about where you're going. But I think we tend to check mark, we're supposed to do these things, and if I do all these things, I'm going to get these places. And if the men do the same thing, they take that extra step and say, hey, I'm awesome.
How about it in
Right.
interviews,
And
though.
that's the next step of the interview.
Because-
You have to be able to stand on your own and say,
Yeah.
you want me because
Because
I'm great.
I think that's a hard thing for women, because a lot of women in an interview oftentimes don't want to talk about their accomplishments. They don't want to say what they've done or why they're the best for the job. Instead, you know, they want to be nice and not say those kinds of things. Do you think that's also what's hurting us? It's first that hurdle of getting into the interview situation, but then also you not being willing to say those things like maybe a man would. Do you think that's a problem?
Well, I think some of it, I mean, as a mom, I think motherhood teaches you a lot about selflessness. And so if your home life, you're really devoted to other people, I think sometimes it can be difficult maybe to make that switch and then, you know, at an interview or when you're at a career, in your job at a career, to then step back and say, well, I'm going to be a different person here. So I think sometimes that motherly role kind of moves into the career world, which can be crippling at some
Which
levels.
goes to the communal point of, you know, your leadership style is to make sure everything gets done. And sometimes you stay extra late or you go without the lunch. You do things for the sake of the team. It's communal, but it's getting the job done.
It
Whereas
is.
leader
And maybe a
qualities can be
different-
too nurturing.
Yeah, I was just going to use the word nurturing. And sometimes I think it's interesting that the female characteristics, as they've been labeled, like sensitivity and getting along with others and being nurturing, are labeled somehow as being more negative. Because this study that Tiffany was talking about, you know, men who, in contrast, were described as being assertive and confident and some of those things, were more likely to get jobs. And even in cases where intellectually and in terms of achievements, the women and the men were equal, men were still getting the job. So I think it's interesting. One of the things it says is, in letters of recommendation, women need to be sure that their letter writer focuses on the agentive qualities.
And to even be willing to show them the study, to tell them this is what you need to say, because using those words made them less credible. It's funny that you mentioned the mom thing, because I always think of a mother figure as, yes, nurturing, kind of, you know, brings her brood in, but at the same time, mothers get things done.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you don't mess with mom. So it's like, when mom says something and she puts her foot down, you're a little bit scared of her.
Right.
So, I mean, those two qualities to me would seem positive, and
But she gives you
I don't
ice
know.
cream after.
She does give you, and she gives you
So that might be it. Right, that might be it.
Gets you ice cream. Let's transition to this next topic. It's kind of related, I guess. There's this term called man session, and the question is, are we in a man session? And there was this article that said that women are now gaining or actually surpassing men in certain financial and academic areas, which is, I guess, surprising to a lot of people. It includes things like income and even raises in education. And there's kind of this change in psychology. Well, here's something that it said is 30 years have actually passed now since women started to receive more bachelor's degrees than men. Since then, the gender gap in college enrollment has continued to grow. And then they just said at DePauw University, for example, only 41% of last year's entering freshman class were male.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I wonder too, you know, it's like the first time in American history that women make up a majority of the workforce in those highly paid management fields. Do you see it as kind of like, well, it's about time? Or do you think there's some kind of problem that exists?
I think the problem only exists if someone's insecure. So in my own relationship with my husband, I actually make almost twice as much as my husband, and he doesn't care, and I don't care. He's my biggest cheerleader, and so in that case, it works perfectly. We don't have a problem with it. If he were to suddenly make double what I make, I would be like, awesome. That means we're making more.
Exactly.
But a lot of men would have a problem with that.
Yes.
You know, I could see a lot of men having an ego issue with that. Some men, I think, are very supportive, and that's the ideal situation, but not always, you know?
And it speaks to how the roles of not just women have changed, but if you consider how women have moved into different spaces, that means the men have moved into different spaces too. And as much as we have these conversations about our advancement and development and women's liberation, we don't always look at the other side of that. You know, I was reading an article about hospitals are doing this huge push to campaign to get more male nurses. The industries have changed. You can't just automatically say, I'm going to go and work in the factory, or I have these college degrees that are guaranteed. They have to work differently. They're staying home and they're taking care of kids. So we have to be as liberal with what we think of men in their role as we've changed the role of what we think of women.
Well, and there's so much more co-parenting with men, and more men are staying home. And to get to your point, Esther, American women are now the breadwinners or co-breadwinners in 2/3 of households, which I think is amazing. And 85% of people now say that they believe men should not necessarily get priority for jobs. So that obviously includes men and women as part of that statistic, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about this before the show. What if you have a friend, especially your best friend, and you hate their spouse? What do you do about it? And we threw this out on Facebook and got a lot of really good responses. What do you guys think?
Well, in my particular situation, it wasn't so much a spouse, it was a friend who had a really, really close boyfriend, and she was having issues. And so, of course, she called out to her friend, who's a life coach, and I tried to help her through it as much without being biased at all. I mean, in my opinion, you have to be very impartial when you're dealing with somebody's relationship. You're not in their situation. It's all hearsay. It's a one-sided story. So you always have to make sure you be there and be as supportive as possible. The only time I drew the line where I started to impose a little bit more of my opinions was when he started stalking her after he had broken up with her, or she had broken up with him. And because she made it very difficult for him to stalk her, he started stalking me. Because she and I were really close friends.
Yeah.
And so that was the only time I really did step in, and I said, look, both of our well-being is at stake here, and this is unacceptable. So I took immediate measures to rectify that issue. But in a situation like that, yeah, absolutely. The article talked about, sure, if your welfare is at stake, you do need to step in. But outside of that, I completely agree. It's none of your business. One day they're complaining about their spouse, the next day they love their spouse. It's very bipolar. So
Esther, you said too, it's like, your best friend's like your sister, where you need to state your opinion, but then you kind of got to let them go and support them.
Exactly. And if and when that relationship fails, you want to be there to kind of catch them when they fall. So you don't want to have created such a such a gap that you can't bridge that. So.
And you don't want to say, I told you so. Right?
Yeah, or if they know how you feel about them, how can they come to you when they're having those moments and they want to complain? And not that you're necessarily going to say, I told you so, but you're thinking it. And
they're thinking it.
So, but how do you
That's a good question. Yeah, so in other words, are you kind of saying it's better not to tell them, that you just kind of go along with it?
No, I don't think that's the case, because this is your best friend, especially. You want to be honest. So you state your opinion. We both know how each other's feel. This is your guy. You like it. I love it. We're just not going to do any couple things together. But at the same time, how are you there for them? Because if you know he's a jerk, he's going to do jerk things, and she's going to need someone to talk to. So I'm just kind of curious, how do you still?
Well, here's my take on it. I mean, I coach a lot of people in relationship issues, and the focus isn't, how do we talk about this other person in a relationship with you? It's how do we deal with you and what you need more of in your life? How do we work on you to help you develop and grow as an individual? And the more and more somebody explores themselves and finds themselves, the more confident they become.
So maybe part of it too is not bad talking about him specifically or her, but saying, you don't deserve this, but I support you. If you love him or her, this can work. But you don't deserve this type of behavior.
Absolutely.
So you're not saying something mean about that person and hurting them at the same time by doing that. We loved your opinions. Thank you, ladies.
And we got so many great Facebook responses. Maybe we can read those a little bit later in the show. Nice to have you all. Some new faces on the table. It was great. Well, up next on the show, do you know how to get energized for a full day of shopping? How about a 4-course lunch? That'd give you a little extra boost, wouldn't it? After the break, a destination that's worth the drive. We'll be right back.